Awesome. Thank you so much for being here. You are now stuck and you cannot leave, so live with it for the next 45 minutes. My name is Sharang Biswas. Apart from a tiny lecture on a random cathedral in Toulouse, this is my first time I'm giving a talk in Europe, so it's very exciting. That was 15 years ago when I was an undergrad. Now I'm an adult. I'm a big boy now. So hopefully that's good. So I want to thank Ropecon for bringing me here because it makes me feel like a bigger boy. So I was asked to be here as guest of honor, as one of the two guests of honor, after Alessandro, whose talk, if you missed it, you missed out a lot because it was really awesome and you learned a lot about football. I was asked to do three things, right? Like, what if you give two talks in a game? I'm like, great. What are the two talks about? Well, the theme is monsters. I'm like, great. So one of my talks will be about monsters. It is not today, sorry. That's tomorrow. And what will the other talk be? Oh, make the talk about you. I'm like, oh, okay, I will talk about me. Who is Sharang Biswas? How exciting. And when I ask that question, I'm like, okay, well, I'll start the American way. What do I do? Oh, I design LARPs. I teach. That's my graduate master's students in role-playing games last semester. I write books about butts. So yeah, this is who Sharang is. I'm like, no, that's horrible. That's very American capitalist way of thinking. I just became American, doesn't mean I have to like absorb that culture that quickly, right? So I'm like, okay, well, what about like what my like interests are? Oh, I like gaming, I like swimming, I like getting my nails done. You can admire them later. I like cooking for lots of people. I like tying hot guys up. So maybe that's who I am. And then I'm like, okay, a talk that's just about me will be extremely boring, right? So I decided I'm going to tell you about a lot of the projects I've done by tricking you into thinking I'm giving a talk with a substantive thesis, right? So theoretically, this talk is about how verbs and procedures affect games. It is cheekily titled, How Do You Want to Do This? Because I think some people like Critical Role. I do not really like Critical Role, sorry. But that's a Critical Role reference, so I'm hip and young and modern. So we're going to do that. We're going to talk about verbs. Cool, if you're in the wrong talk, sorry, like I said, you're already stuck here, so just enjoy it. So a little bit of background before we start talking about games. And like I said, when we get to the games, because this was supposed to be a talk about me, I will be using a lot of the games that I have made. If you come to my talk tomorrow, I'll be using mainly games I have not made, okay? So it will sound very narcissistic today. If you think that, just come tomorrow and hopefully I will be less full of myself, okay? Cool. Also another thing is, I'm a game academic. I teach at universities. I, however, heavily reject the term scholar. I do not think of myself as a scholar. I am not trained in humanities methodologies to provide scholarship. I also don't have the breadth of knowledge that some people in this room who I can look at have when it comes to games. So this is my take as a practitioner of games who also reads sometimes. Cool? Amazing. Okay, so does anyone recognize this song? Right? But we just came with a musicology professor, right? But I would walk 500 miles and I would walk 500 more, etc., right? Now, look at the words I bolded and change the word walk to the word go. And think about the same song, right? Oh, but I would go 500 miles and I would go 500 more, right? The meaning is subtly different, right? Because the word walk has physicality attached to it, has a lot more than just go. Go tends to imply provenance and destination. Walk implies a method of getting there. And the method the whole point of this song is, yeah, I would actually walk 500 miles. If the song was, I would take a plane for 500 miles, it's a lot less special, right? So here we see that verbs have power. Now, this is a poem I learned in the 3rd grade in French class to learn how to do the past tense. I found the translation and then tweaked it myself because I didn't like the translation. And it's called Déjeuner du matin, or Breakfast. It's by Jacques Prévert. And the poem goes something like this, in English, in a bit badly translated English. He put the coffee in the cup. He put the milk in the coffee cup. He put the sugar in the coffee with milk. With a little spoon, he stirred. He drank the coffee with milk, and he put down the cup without speaking to me. He lit up a cigarette. He made circles with the smoke. He put the ashes in the ashtray without speaking to me, without looking at me. He got up. He put his hat on his head. He put his raincoat, because it was raining, and he left. Under the rain, without a word, without looking at me. And I took my head in my hands, and I cried. Now, looking at this very simple poem, which is why it's used for third grade past tense French teaching, even though it's very simple, there isn't a lot of lyrical imagery, right? We don't have like a host of golden daffodils or anything like that. It's a very simple series of verbs, and yet, by looking at this simple series of verbs, you can see the relationship between the speaker and the he, right? You can see, oh no, something's wrong, right? Obviously, at the end, I cried, but if the whole poem was I cried, but with all the other things, all these little actions the he is doing mean something, right? We as I hate the word consumer. It makes us think like I'm in the shop looking at poems, right? As people who are experiencing poetry, we can understand the relationship between the people solely through Prévert's use of verbs, right? Pretty powerful. Now, this is that the power of verbs is not just used in like literature. Contemporary fine art, installation art often uses this kind of thing. Has anyone seen this piece ever? No? Or one person, two people? Awesome. Or a couple of people. Awesome. Amazing. It's very gay, so you should all go see it. It is called Untitled Portrait of Ross in LA by Felix Gonzalez Torres. And the piece, though the man is not part of the piece, he is a viewer in the gallery. The piece is a pile of multicolored candy in a corner somewhere, right? And if you were to see this piece in the gallery, let's say you're with a docent or with a guide at the museum, the docent would walk with you and would tell you about the piece and would start by saying, why don't you take a piece of candy? It's edible. It's actually refreshed every morning. Every morning, the guards put fresh candy. So you're like, great, it isn't even expired candy. Amazing. Take a piece of candy, you eat it, and while you eat it, the docent might tell you, this pile is refreshed every morning to match the exact weight of Gonzalez Torres' boyfriend when he was checked into hospital with HIV/AIDS complications. And you eating the candy represents the disease wasting away his body slowly until he became thinner and thinner and died. And so a lot of people spit the candy out at that point. A lot of people don't. They're like, great, amazing. But a lot of people are like, oh, God, right? And here, the artist Gonzalez Torres understands that, again, the verbs that the participant, the art appreciator, engages in is part of the artwork, right? It isn't just, oh, a pile of candy and let me tell you about how much it weighs, right? The act of consuming it, of eating away at Ross's body as he is consumed by this disease, is part of the artwork, right? And so, we come to games. This is a LARP I ran at the Museum of the Moving Image in New York. It was, does anyone like The Dark Crystal? The Muppet Show? Yeah, so they had a show on the Age of Resistance, the Netflix TV show, and they hired me and my co-designer Nick O'Leary to make a LARP about that. I got to meet Jim Henson's granddaughter, who said she likes my work. And then I'm like, yes, I have won at life. So I'm using this image because I'm supposed to be showing you lots of work that I did, but I'm using the image to think about like the verbs happening, right? There are people LARPing in the front, and then there's me doing the bird in the ear meta technique in the back, and also trying to pose for the camera. But I have this image to show that games are a unique way, a unique art form, because games use verbs as the substrate for the entire artistic message, right? Unlike other art forms like film or literature or music and things like that, games first use a number of different verbs, right? Games might ask you to engage in different kinds of verbs within the same game setting. You might be rolling dice, you might be talking, you might be doing all kinds of things. You might these verbs that you engage in have meanings that are different. They represent different verbs. Very few of us actually slice people's arms off while playing a game, but we are doing things that represent slicing people's arms off, for example. These meanings might change in the same game setting. So rolling a die at one point might mean I'm seducing someone. At another point might mean I'm murdering someone, right? Which could be the same thing sometimes. And these meanings are often endogenous to the magic circle of the game, i.e. they will rarely make sense to an outside observer. I was acutely aware of this because the graduate study room I used to book in grad school was soundproof but had glass walls and was in the middle of the library. And so I'd be like playing Pathfinder, and people are walking by being like, what the hell is going on? I'm like, I'm engaging in a very serious scholarship. Thank you very much. But because they're outsiders, they cannot see the extremely serious humanities research I'm currently doing, right? And so games are a unique art form that engages, asks participants to engage in verb forms that I argue no other art form does. Like I said, right? Again, 2 examples of games I've worked on. I worked on the latest Vampire the Masquerade book about sex, so not that book. But as an example, right? Again, I'm rolling dice. It could mean I'm fighting off a hunger to murder someone, or it could mean I'm fighting off someone trying to murder me, right? And another layer of this is that if you've read Gary Allen Fine's famous book, Shared Fantasy, Fine talks about different levels of meaning that we construct when we play games, right? So this is Avatar Legends, on which I was one of the co-designers. This is a page about how to do combat scenes, right? It says combat scenes, right? If I'm doing a combat scene, at the primary level of reality, I am rolling dice and looking at cards, right? That is basically what I'm doing, and again, to an outsider, that is all I'm doing. At the secondary level of reality, in the game mechanics level, I'm trying to get a high number on my dice, and I'm trying to pick a card and guess which card the DM is going to pick. Because if he's attacking, maybe I want to defend. If he's evading, maybe I want to advance, right? Things like that. And then the tertiary level, at the level of the game diegesis, the fiction of the game, we also have 2 more levels, right? Because at one level, I am fighting, right? I'm playing Avatar. I'm like shooting fire at a dum-dum, at someone trying to rob me. I don't know, right? I'm shooting fire at them. But Avatar, in the game of Avatar, Mendez, who was the chief combat designer of the game, he decided that in Avatar, to reflect the property, no fight is just about fighting, right? You fight in order to learn more about yourself and to learn more about the people you are fighting. So even within this tertiary level of the diegesis of the game, you have 2 separate levels, right? And so here you see the power of me sitting and rolling dice, and yet I am constructing these 4 extra levels of meaning with that simple act, right? And so today, we will talk about how how games use verbs in different ways. Again, this is not a peer-reviewed study. I have not looked at 100 different games and looked at the verbs. This is me being like, verbs. They're fun. Let me talk about it a bit, right? And I have a little bit of experience, and I've done some reading, so we'll do that. Awesome. Questions, comments, or explosions of emotion so far? Thank you for that explosion of emotion. Amazing. Okay, so first we're going to start with the first technique, which is going to be fluffy verbs, right? So this concept of fluff was popularized in the discussion circles by Emily Care Boss. For those of you who don't know, fluff refers to the parts of the game that don't directly affect the game's state, right? So we can look at a classic example of Dungeons and Dragons. The crunch, which is the opposite of fluff, would be like strength, armor class, initiative, right? Well, the fluff would be, ooh, hairstyle. Ooh, like what is your favorite food to have at a tavern? Ooh, right? Now, Emily Carbos writes that there is a, quote, dismissive quality, end quote, to fluff. People are often like, ugh, that's just fluff, right? In fact, for those who play freeform games, in America, a lot of people are like, oh, those aren't even games. We're just talking to each other, right? And I roll my eyes at them, and I'm very sad, and I tell them to enroll at NYU and take my class, and they're like, no, that's the most expensive school in the country. What are you talking about? And I'm like, fair. So, fluff, in fact, makes up the heart of role-playing, right? If I didn't want to use any of the fluff, I would sit there and be like, 20. Is that higher than 15? Yay. 17. Is that higher than 15? Yay. 14. Is that higher than 15? No. That does not sound fun unless you're an accountant, in which case, power to you, because I really need them to do my taxes. So fluff forms the heart, in some ways, of certain kinds of games, of role-playing games, right? And thus, you can think about games that ask players to engage in verbs that only contribute to the fluff, right? They don't contribute to the game state. Simple example, when you ask a player, what hair color do you have, right? Like the example used before, right? Just ask people to describe things. So this is a game I made in 2016. It's called Mad Science Foundation. It was the first board game I made as co-lead designer with my college friend, Max Seidman. He's a brilliant game designer, one of the best in my generation, I think. And in this board game, you have the happy task of being a mad scientist trying to get grant funding, right? Because where do you get all your money as a mad scientist? Oh, you need to get grants from the Mad Science Foundation so you can make all your evil inventions and destroy the planet, right? Amazing. The game is currently out of print, so buy it on eBay from Cryptozoic Entertainment. But when we're making the game, you do all this cool stuff. It's actually quite a cool game, if I may say so myself. I told you, today is about narcissism, right? Tomorrow is not about narcissism. Tomorrow is about monster fucking. Today is about narcissism. Yes. I mean, monster fucking is also narcissism. Anyway, okay. I won't go into the mechanics of the game that much. There are some great videos on YouTube, which don't feature me. But the game has all its inventions, and when we were making our prototypes, as you can imagine, we were making prototypes on note cards, and we would draw these like machines because we can't draw. We're horrible at that. We would just draw a red button, color it red, and be like, oh yeah, that's the big red button of your machine. And we found that when people were playing these inventions, they would press the button. Now again, these are flat note cards. There is nothing to press. But people found great joy in being like, right? I'm a mad scientist. I will press this button and do amazingness, right? And then we made a rule, oh no, when you press the button, you have to make a machine-appropriate noise, right? And we found that people were getting really, really excited about this, right? And it did a number of things, right? First off, when you press a button on a card, it builds tactile memory, so you know I've used this card, right? Secondly, there's some fun in making right? But third, this non-crunchy act, this fluffy act, allowed people to get immersed in the game further. They were like, yeah, we feel like mad scientists because we're pressing the big red button of these machines. And so excuse me, we asked the artist of the game at Cryptozoic, can you please make sure there's a big red button on every card? And in the rule book, it says you must press the button or you have not used an invention. And we found that this, again, fluffy verb contributed greatly to the game-playing experience, right? Similarly, there's a little tabletop role-playing game I made called An Elegy from the Hive Witches. It's from my funeral trilogy. I'm hosting a LARP, which is the second game in my funeral trilogy, tomorrow evening, if you want to come to that. It's very different from this game. It's very sad. This game is about there's a theme in the games I make. So in this game, you play as alien hive witches on a planet, and a bunch of astronauts come to you, and they try and go into your hive to learn about you and steal your treasure, and you murder them one by one. Okay? Until there's one of them left, and then you offer them as a sacrifice to the void. Here it is Loretta who was sacrificed to the void, right? Poor, poor Loretta. I mean, they all died brutally, but she died nobly. And so in this game, it's exactly 3 people. Again, I won't go through the mechanics. You can read about it online. It's in Codex magazine, I think Codex Void. But part of what you do is, as you like slowly murder these astronauts in increasingly imaginative ways, you violently cross off their name, right? You're supposed to like viciously cross it off. Yes, you could tick it. Yes, you could highlight it. Yes, you could just go in order and be like, yeah, the first one's dead. But if you really want to feel like the hive, which is slowly having the hive eat your astronauts, you viciously cross off their name. At the end, you tear the papers into tiny little pieces, fling them in the center, and then reach in as the hive witches to pluck out the final piece. Right? These acts, which are, again, don't affect the game state. If you don't have arms, right? Let's say you are a player who doesn't have arms and you're playing this game, you can still play the game without doing any of these things. But by engaging in these verbs, these fluffy verbs, this hopefully because I made the game, but yes it does, brings you more into the immersion world of the game. Cool? So that was our first point. Explosions of emotion? Yay, awesome. Questions at the end, but keep exploding emotions at me. It makes me feel, again, narcissism. Okay, the second technique is limiting verbs, right? This isn't verbs that limit, this is to limit the verb itself, right? Games are less about what you tell people to do and more about what you tell people they cannot do, right? If you're a game designer, this idea is probably familiar to you, right? Yesterday, I was talking to Alessandro, and he was talking about this. There is this myth of this open world game, right? Where, like, if you could do everything, then that's not a game. Frank Lantz, the former director of the NYU Game Center, has a great little video online about the immersive fallacy, right? Where he says, imagine you're playing an adventure game, you're saving the world, and then every day you have to take like 15 minutes to go poop, right? Do you really need that in the game? Maybe you do. Maybe your artistic intent is about the little biological things that need to happen when you're a hero. Sure, amazing. But most games are not about that, right? So the familiar technique to game design is limiting the verbs, right? And the simplest way to do this is through choices, right? There's a tiny little game I made with Adam Vass called You Will Be Liquid. It's available on my itch. It's a very tiny solo RPG. It takes like 10 minutes to play. If you speed through it, it takes an hour if you don't speed through it. And every junction in this game, it just asks you to freeform describe something, and then ask you to make a little choice. And most of the choices are completely mental. It's how do you feel. This is the only choice in the game where your character will do something. Do you smile at him or do you kiss him? Right? This is a simple example. All of you are familiar with the idea that limiting verbs by giving player a choice between certain things. And few players are going to be like, why? No, I want to break dance with him. Right? They're like, no, this is the experience I've signed up for. This is what the designer has made for me. I'm going to choose one of these things. But you can have other more complex examples. This is an interactive theater / LARP piece I did called Knock Once for Yes. This will take a sec, so bear with me about this example. In this example, players play trainee psychics or trainee mediums. They're learning how to speak to the dead. Okay? And we held this version of the game at a bar in Brooklyn. And when you came in for the show, and the bar was open, there were random people there who were drinking, right? And doing whatever they were doing at the bar, flirting. And if you came in, I would greet you and be like, hi, welcome to our trainee psychic school. I would give them that sheet of paper, and I'd be like, do you know what our school really believes in? We really believe in practical training. So you're going to meet your first client in 5 minutes. Okay? So you as the player get that sheet. The sheet tells you ask questions, be a little dramatic, and then be nice to the audience member, right? To the client. So you'd go sit down. There'd be there's a crystal ball in front of you. There's some tarot cards. Sometimes a crystal ball, not always. There are random things in front of you, and then an actor portraying a client would come to you and would start telling you, oh, blah, blah, blah. And I'll give you an example of one scene. So you sit down, you have your stuff, the actor, this guy comes up to you and sits down, and he says, I don't have a lot of time, my wife is waiting outside, I had an affair with a man 3 months ago. I'm completely straight, but I hooked up with this man, and I felt things I've never felt in my life before. Again, I have a theme in my games. But I felt things I've never felt in my life before, and then the man died the next month in a car accident. I learned on the news, and I'm so torn. I don't know what to do. Am I crazy? Am I queer? What is happening? I need answers. I need you to contact this man. I need you to ask him if what we had was real. Okay? And so you as the audience member, who is the sidekick, is like, okay, and in this example, the person was like, okay, well, tell me a bit about this man, and I'll ask questions. And remember, this is a bar. There are people in the bar doing bar things. And then this really hot dude walks up and sits next to them both, like in their booth. And then the participant, they looked up and was like, what? Oh, I'm sorry, I'm in the middle of a meeting, because they paid for the ticket for this play. Why is this random drunk person in this bar sitting next to me, regardless of how hot they are? So hi, I'm in the middle of a meeting with this person. Sorry, please don't sit next to me. And then the hot dude looks at them and says, I don't see anyone else in this entire building, only you. Because in the idea of this game, an actor portraying the ghost would come and sit next to you and then start talking to you, and you are the only person they can interact with, right? And the idea was that we are limiting communication. We are stopping who can communicate with whom, and that becomes the heart of the game mechanic, where you, as the sidekick, have to now navigate this interesting dynamic of what happens when I can understand you and you can understand what's happening there, right? And that wasn't the only verb we wanted to do. In the end, obviously you're making choices, like I said, right? But in the end, we took away even more from the player, because throughout this interaction, you ask the ghost stuff, the ghost tells you stuff, you relay it, blah, 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 blah. In this scene, there were 3 scenes. This is the third scene. The third scene isn't about a hot guy. The third scene, this girl comes up to you and says, I want to contact my sister. Great. The sister comes, there's a ghost. Oh, wow, the ghost is here. Ooh. Then the girl's like, oh, can you see her? Great. I want to make sure you're not a fake. Ask my sister, what's my mom's favorite food? And then you ask sister, and then the girl keeps asking you a lot of fun stuff that she used to share with her sister, and becomes a very nice, nostalgic moment where the ghost will be like, no, I'd never crush on a boy. I'm lesbian. Again, theme. I'm lesbian. She had a crush on that boy. And you tell the girl that, and the girl's like, oh, okay, you're not a fake. You're really talking to my sister. And you have this lovely time, and then the girl asks you other stuff. And then the girl asks you, can you ask her if she forgives me? I didn't write this, by the way. We had a great writer write this scene. Her name was Jess. The girl asks you, can you ask her if she forgives me? Can you tell her that I shouldn't have had that much to drink, and I shouldn't have gotten in the car? Can you ask her if she forgives me? Right? And the ghost is waiting, like, I can't hear anything, just tell me what you want me to say. And you turn to the ghost and you ask her, she tells you this, do you forgive her? The ghost gets up and leaves, right? And so throughout the game, the ghost has been supplying you with information that you give to the sidekick, give to the client, but at that moment, we take that away. We're like, nope, you do not have access to this information anymore. You now have to make a decision about what to do. And that is where the most interesting part of this game occurs, because then you have to decide, do I tell this client the truth? Do I lie? Do I say, oh, she left, sorry. I don't know, connection's gone, right? Do you say she forgives you? We have had people be like, she forgives you, she knows you made a mistake, but she loves you, she's your sister. Go on and on and on and on. And these are all actors, right? So the sister really plays into that, right? So here, by taking away the ability for the player to do something, right? Especially since they have had that ability the whole time, by taking that away, we try to create a really interesting experience, right? So the second point is, take away verbs from your players and see what kind of magic that could spark. Keep an eye on the time. Awesome. Next, the third technique and the fourth are kind of related. The idea of context. What context does the verb exist in within the game? Not just it's a game. That's obviously a context we all get, but within the game itself, right? So this is a game that I got a little bit of accolade for when I first started making role-playing games. This is in 2016. It's a game called Feast. This is being shown at the Institute of Contemporary Art in Philadelphia. And that's the Museum of the Moving Image in New York. And in this game, you play as ghosts or demons or aliens or something of the sort that are possessing and eating people's thoughts, emotions, and personalities until they become empty husks and you possess them completely, right? And you do this by eating real food. Right? There are mechanics in the game about like, well, first it says cook the food, but obviously in the exhibition I didn't make my guests cook the food. We bought food. You cook the food, you bring it together, and there are different mechanics about the kind of food you eat, what happens, what you say. But the idea is that you are eating these people's thoughts and memories. You can see this game was directly inspired by Untitled Portrait of Ross in LA, right? That art piece inspired this game for me. And the context really puts people in a mindset, right? Like, you are eating a human being, you are slowly killing them in order to learn more about them. One of the questions I try and ask in this game is, can you build something by simultaneously destroying it, right? Because you know nothing about this human until you have completely destroyed them, until you have consumed them completely, right? And that context, I'm sorry, look at my weird expression from when I was like 23 or something there, but anyway, 25? I don't know. That context that you are engaging in this verb, you're not only eating, you are eating a person slowly, really, hopefully, colors how you play the game and how you approach the game, right? Context. This is a game I made also with Max Seidman called Basic Principles of Incantation. It's a LARP interactive theater piece, again, where there's 15 participants who play as students at university taking their first class in magic. We don't call it magic. That's so vulgar. We call it esoterica. And that's me as the professor, teaches them this, and Max, who is my graduate student, sits at the back and takes a lot of abuse from me and does all the special effects, right? It has a lot of special effects, this game. But the game is about the students doing magic together and learning how to do magic. But the magic in this game, you can see an example here, is based on real-world linguistics, right? So we basically took morphology, phonology, phonetics, and morphophonological puzzles and put a coat of magic paint on them and said, here's a game, right? Now, I studied some linguistics in undergrad. That wasn't my major, that was engineering, but I studied some linguistics, and you know, sitting and doing linguistics homework is not always the most fun thing to do. It's actually quite fun compared to other kinds of homework because you get to make silly noises and touch your throat a lot and be like, oh, ah, ooh, right? But sitting and doing homework is no one's idea of fun. However, the context of the game is you are sitting and doing this for magic class, right? And so altering the contextual surroundings of what would otherwise be a really boring verb alters the perception of the verb you're engaging with, right? In the end, the climax of this game, I like fall into an enchanted sleep, and they have to break the spell and rescue me, and blah, blah, blah. And this like ups the tension. They're like, yeah, yes, let's use the blackboard and do deductive reasoning, yeah, right? With linguistics, so exciting, right? And it only works because we've created this fictional remove. We've created this context within which a very boring act can be fun. If you might have seen that famous XKCD joke, which is like, every tax season, I go to my gaming convention and bring my tax paperwork and make the gamers do it and tell them it's a hot new sci-fi LARP, right? About planetary economics or whatever, right? I wish I could do that, but people know I'm a game designer, so they'll be like, So again, this technique is about the context in which the verb exists within the game space as well, like within the magic circle itself, can do a lot to make people engage in the verbs differently. And then finally, there's this idea of meaningful verbs. Can the verb itself carry meaning outside the game space, in the primary reality itself, going back to Gary Allen Fine, and can that meaning collide with the meanings of the tertiary reality, and what happens then, right? And this is really exciting, and also what some people say I'm notorious for. So there's a tiny little game I made. It's called Several Miles from Heaven. It's a play on the game 7 Minutes in Heaven, if those of you who might know that. It's a very American teenage pastime. This is a game, it's a two-player role-playing game, two-player LARP, where you play as teenage demigods who are about to have sex, right? and the game is played by stripping. The main game mechanic is taking your clothes off. Okay? Because the game, at the start of the game, you like draw sigils on your body in specific places, and the thing is like you're asking each other, can you take this off? Can you take this off? And as you take off your clothes, if sigils are revealed in certain order, something happens, right? You might blast the other person away with your divine essence, or you might have the most scorching, universe-ending sex ever, whatever, right? But this game, again, the main game mechanic is stripping. Right? For most people, removing your clothes in front of someone else carries very specific meanings, right? It is not the same as being naked. I'm in Finland. You've all been to saunas, right? You are naked in front of each other all the time. Great. You try doing that in America, everyone thinks you're weird. So being naked and taking your clothes off are different things, and you can all imagine this, right? I was really trying to tap into this idea of taking your clothes off is both is a vulnerable act and an intimate act simultaneously, right? It can show that, oh, I'm being very vulnerable, I'm embarrassed, and part of the game mechanics is about that. So you reveal secrets, an act you're guilty about by you're vulnerable, and also the act of intimacy, like you talk about something about them that you enjoyed, a kindness they once enacted, right? And I was really trying to use the associations with the verb stripping that exist outside the game and match them to the emotional resonances I wanted players to achieve, to experience within the game. And hopefully, it may succeed with me, but I've played this mainly with people I would often be naked with. So I've never played with someone who I would never be naked with. Maybe I should try that, if anyone wants to do this. And hopefully this resist by using verbs in this intentional way works. And then my final example is something that people say is extremely notorious. I'm extremely notorious for. So this is an anthology called Honey and Hot Wax that I co-edited with Lucian Khan, another New York-based designer. We got 2 grants from the Effing Foundation for Sex Positivity. And this is an anthology of LARPs about sex. Half the games are they're about sex, they discuss different aspects of sex and sexuality. Half the games ask the players to have sex while playing the game, right? Real life, like you are going to have sex in real life while playing this game in different ways, right? Half the games do that. Of course, the game has an extensive chapter on calibration and emotional safety and things like that, and obviously you should not play this with someone you're not comfortable doing that with, so that's assumed already, and there's a chapter discussing that, and each of the games discuss that as well. But half the games ask you to have sex because the conceptual seed for this anthology, there are 8 games by 10 different designers in this anthology. It's published by Pelgrane Press, which I'm very proud of because they're known for publishing something like 13th Age, right? Fantasy RPG, or like Gumshoe. So I'm really proud that they're like, yes, we will publish your weird sex anthology, Sharang. And I'm like, amazing. I got grants for it. I'm a professor. Right? So the conceptual seed of this was, yeah, we think about all these kinds of verbs when playing games, right? All these LARPs of all these kinds of verbs playing games. I just made Feast recently. I'm like, yeah, even eating food and things as game mechanics. Well, what about having sex? What about fucking someone? What does that do to the game, right? Sorry, I will use strong language in all my talks. I should have said that earlier. Yuka asked me, should I mark your thing the 18 plus? I'm like, so I'm going to use 2 examples that are in this anthology. I have 7 minutes left. In the Cleft of the Rock is by Lucian Khan, and in this game, you are imagining another player as a sentient landscape while touching them in ways they ask you to. So they will tell you some verbs. They'll be like vibrate, stroke, slap, poke, right? And you will do those verbs on their body while describing their body as an alien landscape or a fantastical landscape, right? There's a lot more going on. There are all these different mechanics. I won't go into them in detail. But I find this game really, really conceptually interesting, right? Because and at the end of the game, you are touching their genitals. Like the game says, now touch their genitals, right? So I was like, the first time I play tested this, I was slapping his vulva and being like, the moon is, the moon crater is doing this, and there's a tree over there, blah, 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 right? It was the first play test, it was a bit rough, right? I find this really interesting, right? Because how is the physicality of me touching someone's genitals affecting the way I am exploring an alien landscape, right? And what's more interesting, Lucian Khan has lived his whole life grappling with different versions of fictions, truths, and stories being layered onto his body, because Lucian is trans, right? And so he has been told for a lot of his life that this is what your body means, this is the story of your body, this is male, this is female, this is fat, this is not fat, this is ugly, this is hot, right? And so this game asks you to explore the layering of those fantasies in one of the most physical ways possible, right? And again, meaningful verbs. Me slapping his vulva, well, what does that do to this fictional space I am creating? And what does that do to this conceptual idea that the game explores about layering truths and stories onto bodies, right? The Echo of the Unsaid is the game that I made for the anthology. I got the idea when driving back with my ex-husband from a nudist summer camp, which was quite fun. It was the first nudist summer camp I'd been to in America. Again, in America, everyone was like, oh, nude, oh, right? But that one was cool, so that was fun. It's a game where you play, everyone knows what a fraternity is in American culture, in American colleges, right? So in this game, you can be any gender when you play the game, but the characters are two frat boys who keep having sex and not talking about it, right? It's called The Echo of the Unsaid. So the game is divided into like drama scenes followed by sex scenes. And the game, the first sex scene is give the other player a hand job, right? Without talking. The second sex scene is give the other player a blow job without talking. The third sex scene is make out with the other player. And the last sex scene is look into their eyes for 30 seconds, right? No, 3 minutes, not 30 seconds, 3 minutes, right? And so this game asks players to actively and bodily have sex with each other. And my exploratory question was, what happens when you do that? What happens when this meaning-laden verb, giving a blowjob, to most people has a lot of meaning. Even if you're in the dark room behind a glory hole, if you're giving someone a blowjob, that has certain meanings to it, right? How does that change our experience of the fiction, of the diegesis, of the game that you are playing? What does this do to our mental state, our storytelling, right? And find out. Buy the game or ask me for it. I'll give you a copy. Try it tonight and let me know. Honestly, I've only met 4 people who've admitted to actually having played the game. One of them is a colleague of mine at NYU, so that was fun. So I really want to know what people think of this game. Awesome. So, are 4 techniques that I thought of. Fluffy verbs that don't change the game state, limiting what verbs you are allowing the players to engage with and making limits on those verbs themselves, changing the context of what could be boring verbs, and then trying to see what associations and meanings do these verbs have outside the game, or what can they bring into the game, right? So, some techniques. That is the end of the big part of my talk. I was asked to do a talk about some of my work. This is some of my work. That game, Moon Eye on Roseville Beach, I was one of the writers on it. I wasn't the main writer. Just won an Emmy Award last year. This is a game about making salad and cursing someone with witchcraft. Tome of Dark Delights is on my itch. It's a book of D&D themed erotica. And that's it's my first book. It's coming out next year. The Iron Below, remember, it's fiction. But yeah, some of my stuff. I write a lot about games and magazines. I write a lot of fiction. Look it up. And I'm weird, right? So, one thing to take away from this talk, apart from the blatant narcissism of me talking only about games I've made, again, I was asked to do this, but is the idea of when you whether you're a player casually, whether you're a player as a scholar, which again I'm not, whether you are a game designer, when you play a game or design a game, think about the verbs in the games and think about the function of those verbs and what you can do to make them weird. That's my contact deets. I'm around this whole weekend. Email, that's Instagram or Twitter. I'm also on Grindr if you're into that. Yeah, find me, buy my games there. That's some of my games. I don't know if there's time for questions. There might be 1 minute for questions. Just talk too much.
You have a few minutes for questions.
I have a few minutes for questions. Yay, thank you so much. You were awesome. Thank you for that emotional explosion. Questions or comments? You can make it. I will not stop you from making comments. If you just say you're hot, I'll be like amazing.
Hi, thank you.
Shit show.
Thank you. How does it work to make children work and exist in public in the United States and in the industry?
Yeah, you have to do exactly what Alessandro said in the last session, is speak really loudly and confidently, right? Because if you're timid about this, people are going to eat you alive, right? It is a truth in the US that if you do anything related to gender or sexuality, even people who you think would be your allies are going to eat you alive because they will have some sort of problem with your work, right? And you just have to, sadly, have a thick skin and stand by your principles, but also keep an open ear, right? Because you may have made mistakes, right? You may have done something badly. Good to keep an open ear and be like, yes, you actually have a point. But you have to understand that if you make a game in the modern world, someone will think you're a fascist, right? For some reason that you have never considered, right? And you have to sometimes be like, I value your opinion. Moving on.
Well, you have rules in your games, so
Exactly. I actually have heard that from a student at NYU before, that having rules is fascism. I'm like, why are you getting a master's in game design? I mean, no. They are questioning the process. That is very good, you know? Great. Good for them. Questions?
American here.
Maybe, yeah, I don't know.
Well, thank you very much. Hello? Considering you're working on these different concepts in games which have these different kinds of verbs which are quite topical and different sexual meanings and such, considering they can have a different effect on how people feel on those. What's your experience been like doing these kinds of games, kind of expressing yourself not just of who you are, but using these games to find other people that would be interested in playing these games and maybe expressing themselves even more?
I don't think I quite understand.
And like these verbs and such, how their reactions on with these kinds of games, what kind of reaction do you get out of them? Are they more in the sense open-minded? Are they more?
Yeah, I get all kinds of reactions. I have people like, oh my God, I never played this game ever in my life. Some people have said, why would this exist? You're corrupting our youth. And I'm like, well, I'm a professor, so sorry. One of the things, the beginning of the preface of the book written by Naomi Clark, who wrote, even if you don't ever play these games, read them and think about them, right? And I recommend that to everyone for any kind of game ever. Even if it does not interest you, like this is a game I'd never play, it's too bloody or it's too emotional or whatever, read the game and think about it, because even the act of doing that will make you think about games and game design. And with that, my time is up. Thank you, you were an awesome audience. Tomorrow I'm talking in the morning about monster fucking. It's a much longer talk. It's interactive. You will not be fucking a monster in the... You might actually. And then I'm running a LARP in the evening. And check out Alessandro's other stuff as well. He's an awesome co-guest of honor. Yay! Go have dinner, please. Drink water. Sleep.